Good evening, Albuquerque. Thank you for joining Mayor Tim Keller's Coronavirus Update Telephone Town Hall. This is our 5th telephone town hall since March as we work to keep everyone updated here in Albuquerque. For those of you who are wondering if you are connected, you are. Right now, you are in what is called listen-only mode, which means that you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. Today's town hall will again focus on how our city reopens and what that looks like for residences and businesses. In just a moment, we will introduce Mayor Keller and other city leaders, and then we will open it up for questions. But first, let me go over a few housekeeping items. If you would like to ask a question of Mayor Keller, you can press *3 on your phone, and you will be put into line to speak with one of our staff members. Again, to ask a question for Mayor Keller, please press *3 on your phone, and you will be put in line to speak with one of our staff members. They will hop on, take down your name and your question, and then you will return to the town hall. Then, if you hear your name, you will be live to the entire conference and can ask your question directly to Mayor Keller and city officials. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible, so please press *3 right now if you'd like to ask a question. Again, press *3 right now to get in the queue to ask a question. Along with Mayor Keller, we also have a number of city leaders joining us today who can speak to some of the specific questions folks in Albuquerque have been asking. We have Lawrence Royale, our Chief Operations Officer. We have Carol Pierce, our Director of Family and Community Services. We have Shel Sanchez, our Director of Cultural Services. Dr. Mark DeMena, our Deputy Director of Environmental Health. Harold Medina, Deputy Chief of the Albuquerque Police Department. David Cheney, our Civic Engagement Manager. And David Sayers, the Manager of our Small Business Office. Now, I would like to turn the conversation over to Mayor Tim Keller for some initial remarks before we jump into questions. Mayor, go right ahead.
Well, good evening, Albuquerque, and welcome to another edition of one of our direct public conversations. And as Alan mentioned, we've been having a number of these sessions, and we try and rotate some by telephone, some by social media, some during the day, some during the evening. And so we're also doing, of course, a daily briefing each day at 11:30. That is available on government TV and our social media platforms, and from time to time, some of our news stations. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and whether you have a question or you just want to listen in, it's important that we all share accurate information during this time. And since Corona's come to our community, we know that this has also been a difficult time for folks. And, especially those who need to get back to work in order to provide for their families, those who need child care options, and also those who are just worried if it's safe. Now, we've been planning carefully for when the state says it's time to open back up, and we are ready for the next phases in this process. And as the state announced yesterday, we are now able to join into phase 1 of reopening. We'll be talking a lot about that tonight. But in terms of our city's preparations, we announced today our public plan on how we're going to enter this phase 1 reopening stage. And for us, it included regular communication with private companies and faith communities, in addition to city departments. It also meant making changes in occupancy limits and making those easy for all businesses to follow new signage from our fire marshal. It also means opening up our lottery programs for the summer youth programming for working families. And so this is a range of different activities that we can talk about if there's questions. Again, these are all available by lottery, but you have to make the reservation to get into lottery. So you can do that online at this time. And again, if there's questions, we can go into that. We also put in place some protocols for city employees and city buildings to begin to reopen that are all in line with COVID-safe practices. And lastly, we've also planned for how we're going to deal with these quarantine situations and contact tracing. We anticipate there's going to be outbreaks in different areas of town or different buildings or different programs. And so the key is for us just to be ready to make sure that we can get everyone who is exposed quickly tested. And until those results come back, make sure that they're also quarantined. And so we're setting up procedures for that as well. With that said, I want to remind everyone how important it is that we continue to stay home as much as we can and to refrain from gathering in large groups. And I also want to mention that, this would be a lot easier in many ways operationally just to stay closed. But we know that that is not an option for our city for a number of reasons. It's not an option for many of our residents, folks who can't afford to stay at home if they are allowed and asked to go back to work. And secondly, and somewhat unfortunately, home is not always the safest place for a large number of our children. And we need places for our kids to go where they can be seen and get access to services. And finally, home is not always the healthiest place. We know that for a lot of folks, we've got to have open spaces and parks to have a healthy environment that is different perhaps than, a small single-bedroom apartment that an entire family might be living in. So we've got to work together to try and preserve these reopening programs and open spaces for folks who really don't have other means. And so there's no requirement here. We're just asking folks that, if you have a backyard, try and stay home, utilize your backyard and your neighborhood spaces, and, save things like the zoo and so forth for folks who don't have a backyard or a house to spread out in. And so I'm sure there's lots of people waiting on the phone with a bunch of questions to ask. So we're going to go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor. And thank you again to everyone who is participating with us in this telephone town hall. If you're just joining us, to ask Mayor Keller and city officials a question, please press *3 on your phone to be connected with our staff. Again, press *3 on your phone to be connected with our staff to ask Mayor Keller a question. Mayor, right off the bat, we're seeing a number of folks with similar questions who might have seen the governor's announcements yesterday, and they're wondering how the governor's announcements impact plans here at the city.
Well, that's, I think, at the forefront of everyone's minds. And let me, try and paraphrase in general sort of where we're at and where the state is at. Firstly, we've been reminding folks that, there may come a time when Albuquerque has to go a different path than the state because we are just the largest city in in basically 1,000 square miles. And we have the hospitals and the shopping malls and the airport and all of these things that our whole state uses. But right now, we're very much in alignment with the state. So the city is following suit with what the state announced yesterday, and I think really there's sort of 3 high-level categories that were announced. And, number one is just this basic notion of, what's the deal with going back to work? And the story is that, retail is now 100% open. It doesn't matter what, not 100% open. All of retail is open, no matter what you sell. But only at a 25% level. And big box stores remain at 20%. And of course, houses of worship were open to 10%. And entertainment venues, services still closed. So indoor malls, theaters, salons, things of that nature. And, I think the other big question was, of course, what do I do with my kids? School is out. And if I have to go back to work, what are the options here? And so the state outlined in conjunction with the city protocols for daycares to open up, for early childhood centers to open up, and for summer programs. And again, these are all based on COVID-safe practices where children are kept in cohorts so we can track any exposures that might happen, but there's also intense cleaning and sanitizing, and there's also pre-screening before activities. And so there's a lot more on that if folks have questions. But again, there are now options for your children. And then I think the third question is really, am I safe? How are we doing in Albuquerque? And there's a key stat that the state and the city are using, and it's really around the rate of spread. And I won't get into the detailed numbers other than to say that we're looking for a 1.15 rate of spread. And last week we were at about 1.16, and the latest figures were that we were at 1.09, which is below the threshold to begin reopening. Now, this is just for the metro area. Other parts of our city, unfortunately, are not doing quite as good. So we feel good about where we're at in the metro area. We have capacity in our testing system and our hospital system. And so we feel it's appropriate to, in a phased, gradual way, begin to open up and see what happens, and also be ready to make adjustments along the way. So that is really a credit to everyone in Albuquerque who's been doing a good job. But I want to remind folks, to get to that next phase, to get to phase 2, we have to keep following the new rules in place. And so I think that pretty much summarizes where the state's at and sort of how that relates to the Albuquerque metro area.
Thank you, Mayor. For those of you who are just joining our coronavirus telephone town hall, you can press *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and city officials your question. We're going to move to our first caller, Mayor, and we're seeing a number of questions about the buses and some questions about when the bus routes might go back to normal. But Richard has a question about what they might have to do to ride the buses. Richard, go right ahead.
Mayor Keller, this is Richard. Got a question for you. What about masks on the buses? Is that going to be mandatory or what?
We might have lost the end of that, but I think we got the gist of the question. So, Richard, let me share a few things, and then I'll ask Lawrence Rael, our COO, is on the line, who oversees transit. But the short story is currently we're going to continue with that Saturday service. And again, that doesn't mean the day Saturday. That just means that's what we call our limited service. So that's going to continue, but we're adding helper buses to make sure that people are spread out inside the bus. So there's like little buses that follow the big buses to make sure that we always have enough room to spread out. Now, we also are going to institute some of the face mask policies. So Lawrence can go into that. And then for your expectations, we know there's actually been a high demand for the buses, and we want to bring them back. So pretty soon, in the next few weeks, I think the beginning of June, maybe mid-June, we're going to start opening up even the ART route. We do have to wait 2 weeks for it. It has to do with the way the drivers work, but they all have to rebid, and sort of we have to assign drivers to routes. So we can't turn it on right away. We need a couple of weeks. Lawrence, you want to add in from there?
Thank you, Mayor. Richard, that's a great question. We are looking at opening our service to the public in about the 13th of June. We will begin by opening up our major routes that connect the major portions of the city to our downtown, et cetera. So, for example, our art program will start up on the 13th as well. It will have bus service along Central. A lot of our major routes will open up as well. And as the mayor indicated, one of the interesting issues about our transportation system is that we have to ensure that we keep social distancing in our buses. So as a result of that, we will have buses that will be running at about a quarter of capacity. But if you're at a bus stop and you don't get in the first bus, as the mayor said, we'll have helper buses that will come right behind that other bus to pick up the remaining passengers, so we keep everybody safe. And as it relates to the face masks, we are going to encourage every rider to have a face mask to get on our buses, and we will have some extra face masks in our buses so that we can help those that don't have masks. But the idea here is to begin to open it up gradually and to provide the routes that we need to have service on. And as we move to the month of June, more and more routes will open. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. A reminder, *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and city officials a question, and you'll be connected with our staff. *3 to ask a question. Next, we're going to go to Marvin, and Marvin has a question about homelessness in Albuquerque. Marvin, go right ahead.
Hello. Yeah, nice to talk to you. I'm calling to see about the homeless people here in the International District, mostly by Central Pennsylvania and Dallas Domingo Northeast. There's a lot of homeless people out here, like they're drinking and doing drugs all together, big groups. I see the Albuquerque police go by. They don't even stop them. At least like stop them and say, you guys disperse. At least check their IDs, run IDs, them have some warrants or whatnot. You know, and then some kind of mandatory testing for the homeless, because they're running around here like crazy. I mean, I'm sorry for them. I pray for them. But what about the community here too? You know, just because we live in the war zone doesn't mean we're like them also. We got kids on here. We got grandmas, grandpas, mothers, husbands, whatnot. So that's my.
Thank you for that question, Marvin. And, you know, it is true that we're seeing, which is no surprise, all across the country, an increase in homelessness and folks especially being out on the streets. And so, you know, for us, I think there's a couple of folks who might want to speak to this. Number one, we have our deputy chief on the phone, and he can speak to this a little bit, and so can Carol Pierce, who runs all of our homeless programs. But let me give you just a quick overview. Number one, I think our officers have come a long way in terms of interacting with the homeless. And we even have special teams, like they're called the Coast Team, and they have different names, but they're trained in behavioral and mental health. And so hopefully what you're seeing is, you might not see it as they drive by in their car, but on a daily basis, most of our different homeless groups are being checked on. And so we've actually done, relative to other cities, a pretty good job on this. Also on testing. We are one of the few cities that from early on had testing at our West Side shelter. And we now have a pickup for the West Side shelter up in the International District. So also we're building the tiny homes project. The county's really the lead on that, but the city has helped a little bit on that, and that should help with some of that population up there. So there's kind of a lot in the queue on this. I want to free up Carol and Chief Medina. I do want to mention, just because you do live in the neighborhood, that pretty soon we're going to be groundbreaking on a huge, new, beautiful library there, which hopefully will just send a signal that we care about the International District. I know that wasn't direct to your question, but I'm just so excited about that project, I wanted to mention it. But back to homelessness. Carol, why don't you touch on some of this? And then Chief Medina, if you could hit on the APD interactions.
Thank you, Mayor. Marvin, I really appreciate your compassion for those without homes. We've got a lot of options for people who are on our streets without homes. First of all, our outreach teams, and the mayor mentioned one, our Coast team, as well as other outreach teams with Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless and Heading Home, to name two of them, are reaching out to get people connected to service, to hand out information and talk to them about COVID and the spread of COVID, and get them in for testing. So one of the key strategies for this COVID virus is to test and to screen and test. And we've been doing that in a lot of our homeless shelters, besides being a testing site out at the West Side. And to date, we've had only negative test results, and we think that's one of the strategies to know what's going on with that population, and to make sure that people aren't living close together in our shelters, but getting connected to resource.
Thank you, Carol. Chief Medina, did you want to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add that that's a great question. And since the beginning of this administration, we really focused on the concept of community-oriented policing. And one of the things that we realize as a police department is there are a lot of issues that are not a police issue, that the police are not the proper resource to address this issue. And I think the mayor and Carol really emphasized all the steps we've taken to assist the homeless population in Albuquerque. And being homeless constitutionally is not a reason for our officers to stop, identify somebody, and run them for warrants. It's something I wouldn't want my officers to do. It's something that I don't think is proper, and we want to grow with the community. We want to create a bond with the community, and that includes all aspects of the community. One thing our officers are going to be doing is we did get a number of masks donated to us today, and tomorrow we're going to be distributing those masks to some of our specialized units that we have out in the community. And we're going to ask them to distribute those masks and face coverings to the homeless individuals that are on the streets of Albuquerque that may not have those items available to them. And we're also asking the public if they have any extra face coverings or masks, if they're willing to donate them, to just drop them off at a substation. And our officers will have these always available. And our goal is going to be to encourage individuals to use these masks and not make it a punitive type of activity. We want to continue to work hand in hand with the community and continue to strengthen our bond of trust with the community. And we think that this is the direction that is best suited for the long-term goals of the Albuquerque Police Department beyond the COVID-19 pandemic incident. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Medina. Again, to ask Mayor Keller and our city officials a question, please press *3 on your phone and you'll be connected with our staff. *3 to ask a question. Next up, we're going to go to Mildred. And Mildred has a question about city pools. Mildred, you're live on the line with the mayor. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. There were many older adults that were lap swimming at the city pools early in the morning before all this happened. And I wondered what the plan is about making that possible again. I know many of us would be willing to swim only one day a week in order to get it where spread out the crowd, in other words, that maybe we could be assigned a day to swim or something where that would be possible.
Thank you,
so I
Mildred.
wonder if there's a plan.
Yeah, I have good news for you. There is a plan. And in fact, the pools are kind of an interesting, I want to do some myth busting for a minute. When you say pools and, viruses, people tend to equate that with water and it's spreading. And I just want to mention a little bit of science here that, pools are actually really good because just like everything else, chlorine pretty much, at least topically cleans everything. So it's, as if you're just jumping in a Clorox wipe there. So anyway, pools are actually a really good thing. And so we want to open them in a COVID-safe way as soon as possible. We do have a plan in place, and it is exactly what you mentioned. We will basically have a reservation system, and we'll also, assuming that there's more demand than supply, we'll say, okay, you can get one a week, but then you have to wait till next week and that kind of thing. And then we'll have lane spacing and so forth. So the city is ready to do that. Now, the state right now has not allowed us to open pools, and so we're respecting that. But we're hoping in phase 2, which if we keep all doing our part, that could be sometime in early June, which isn't that far away. If we get the go-ahead for reservation-only limited pool access, we're going to be able to move very fast. So give us a couple of days after that, and we'll be reaching out on that. And then we do have a phase 3 as well, which would allow different groups of folks perhaps to reserve at the same time. That'd be like more of a metering or batching system. But again, we'll use technology, but also the phone. We always want to make sure that people can always just call kind of 311 and get situated with a reservation that way as well. So I would just say hang in there, and as soon as the state gives us the green light, we'd love to get you back in the water.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor. Again, *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller a question. You'll be connected with our staff. They'll take down your question and then return you to the conference. Next up, Mayor, we're going to go to Lucy. And Lucy has a question about testing. Lucy, you're live on the line.
Hi.
Lucy, are you there?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
My question is, I am a senior citizen of 80 years old, and if I want to get tested, where do I go or who does the testing for the virus?
Thank you, Lucy. Great to hear from you. And a few things that I can share with you. The fastest way is to call this hotline for the state. And what they'll do is they'll get your zip code and some information, and really specifically give you some options. So let me give you that number, but then I'll also tee up our own Dr. Mark Domena to just outline in general where testing's happening and kind of who it's for and when it's available. So the easiest thing you should do is just call 1-855-600-3453. And you can also take a look at the website, nmdoh.org. But Dr. Domena, why don't you give us an overview of testing right now in Albuquerque? There are lots of good options.
Thanks, Mayor. This is Mark Domena. I'm the Deputy Director of the Environmental Health Department. As the Mayor said, there are lots of areas where testing has been set up. There are different areas of town that already have locations, and some of them have different requirements. So you'll be asked if you call that hotline whether you're experiencing any symptoms, and they'll work through those symptoms, what they are for you. Some of the testing sites are really intended for people who are already displaying symptoms. That would be some of the Presbyterian sites and some of the other ones. If you have internet access, our website, www.cabq.gov, has direct links to maps that show where all of those sites are, and those also include information about their hours and that type of thing. And I think you can get that through the hotline as well. There's at least one test site that isn't requiring you to display any symptoms at all if you just have uneasiness about this or a symptom you didn't have before, but that doesn't really match what the hotline asked you about, you can get tested there, whether you're displaying any symptoms or meeting the other criteria or not. And as you've been hearing, the real push right now is to get lots more people tested. We know there are asymptomatic carriers out there, and the way that we're going to find out just how well we're doing in the community is to get more and more people tested. So definitely encourage you to call the hotline that the mayor gave you and find out what your options are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeMena. As a reminder, if you're just joining us, you can press *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and city officials a question, *3, and you'll be connected with our staff. Next, we have a question from Jeanette, and Jeanette is curious about libraries. Jeanette, you can go right ahead. You're live on the line.
All right. Hi, good evening. I want to know when the libraries will open back up and also the community centers. When will they open up, and what type of capacity they will have?
Thank you, Jeanette. I think we also have some good news for you here, again, in a COVID-safe way. What we are doing with all the things that you mentioned is we are trying to reduce the volume of people, who come through the door, and we're also trying to reduce the contact intensity, so how closely people come into contact or how often. And so we've gone through all our city programs and whatnot and mapped this to the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So I think what I'll do is tee up Dr. Shel Sanchez is on the phone, and she happens to also run our libraries, our Director of Cultural Services. Shel, if you don't mind kind of walking us through that, and go ahead if you're comfortable and talk about community centers. If not, Carol, you can handle that one.
Okay, thank you. This is Shel Sanchez, and we are very excited that we are going to start opening the libraries on June 2nd, so that's a Tuesday. When we first opened them, all of our branches will be open except for 2. Ernie Pyle and the Special Collections Library will not open in phase 1, but they will open in later phases. The libraries will have a little bit different schedule. So if you have a favorite branch, you should definitely check out the library website when that date gets closer, because libraries will all be operating 5 days a week. Some of them used to be 6 or 7, but in this first phase, everybody will be operating 5 days a week. So there'll be a little bit of changes. The computers will not be available during the first phase. We won't have seating available, so we're just really asking people to come in, pick up their books, pick up their items, maybe, check out some new books, and then move along so that we never have too many people in the building at once. But we are very, very excited that these really important spaces are going to be opened back up to the community. Thank you. And I'm going to pitch community centers to Carol Pierce.
Thank you, Director Sanchez. Right now, our community centers, as you know, have been closed for adult programming. And moving into phase 1, that will remain so, that they will be closed for adult programming, but they are open for our youth programming for this first step. And as we move forward into the next phases, then we will look toward having our adults come back into those community centers. It goes back to what the mayor is saying about taking this one step at a time and keeping the appropriate social distancing and numbers of people in those facilities. And I'm glad you asked about community centers. We want to be back online when we can for our adults that enjoy those centers.
Thank you very much, Director Pierce and Director Sanchez. A reminder, you can press *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and our city officials a question, and you'll be connected with our staff. Next up, we're going to go to Tino. And Tino has a question about children and parks. Tino, you're on the line with the mayor.
Hello, Mayor. Yes, I have 2 young children and nieces and nephews, and I was just wondering what we're doing to clean up and sanitize the parks and the playgrounds for the kids. And also, we were downtown, and we noticed that the alleys and the dumpsters downtown Albuquerque are real dirty and nasty down there. I was wondering what we're doing to clean up those areas.
Thanks, Tino. Appreciate that. And with two little kids myself. Ours are, everyone's going a little stir crazy at home. And so we all need different, outlets for our children and for our families. So a couple of things. First, let me tee up, Lawrence Rail helps oversee our parks and solid waste, actually. But as he prepares, let me share a couple of thoughts. Number one, we're blessed in our city to have a lot of open space and parks per capita. It's actually one of the things that Albuquerque is top ranked for around the country. The challenge is we have so much of it that even during normal times, we experience, like on Memorial Day and busy weekends, our parks can get a little overwhelmed. But anyway, we're continuing again to keep them open, but we're asking people to use them and then go home so that they don't get too crowded. And we are doing a regimen of sanitizing the benches. And we were actually doing the play equipment. As a reminder, playgrounds are currently closed. We may open them in a couple of weeks, but we do not recommend using playgrounds. But I also want to mention that, the science, as other cities have progressed through this, there really hasn't been any strong correlation to play equipment. It's not that there isn't anything, but there hasn't been, it's kind of been an unknown, and folks haven't really been able to say that it's a huge issue or not. But again, a reminder, currently they're closed, and when we're ready to reopen them, we're going to sanitize them. So let me also mention just downtown. We've had an interesting situation with our trash pickup where, because no one's working, everyone is home. So the residential waste trash pickup has been, it's spring and everyone's cleaning their yard, and now everyone's home and their kids are home. So we had to throw all our extra drivers on residential pickup. And conversely, there are very few businesses that are, open and using their trash pickup. So right now we are shorthanded, though, on the commercial pickup because we've had to put so many people on residential. So we're working through this, but what you're saying makes sense. But as we begin to reopen and reshift, that should rebalance out. So with that, Lawrence, what else would you like to add?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just simply say that, as the Mayor indicated, our parks are open, and we are also very much aware of the fact that people just want to get out and enjoy the open spaces that we have around the city. So we would encourage folks to go out to the parks and use the park facilities. Make sure that as you're out there that you are mindful about social distancing, just so that everyone is safe and everyone can enjoy the open spaces that we have. All of the open spaces like Elena Gallegos and those kinds of facilities are out there. And so you can use the parks. As the Mayor indicated, the playground equipment will be sanitized as we can get to it, and as they are closed. But use judgment as you're using this equipment and these areas, just to be mindful that it's better to get the kids out there to get some exercise, et cetera, enjoy the parks, but to be mindful that lots of folks use these facilities, and if you can get out there for a while, that's great. And we're hopeful that maybe in the later phases we can open up the playground areas as well, so that young people can use them and we can enjoy those. As it relates to the trash issues along our alleys, et cetera, we in our solid waste department have a Clean Cities team that does go around and clean up alleys, and we're going to start moving forward with getting that group, now that we're able to begin to get more employees out to do some work, to start cleaning up those areas. So we will be very mindful about the downtown areas especially, and try and get our folks out there within the next couple of weeks to try and begin to get our alleys and streets cleaned up so that we can all enjoy the great city that we have. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence. A reminder, *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and our city officials a question. We're going to try to get to as many questions tonight as we can. Mayor, I'm going to summarize a few questions we're seeing here from folks. They're asking, what are the best ways to help right now as we continue to move through the pandemic? How do you get involved? How do you volunteer? Things like that.
Sure. Well, reminder, the best thing we can do is help out on the health front, just individually. So as a reminder, whether it's washing hands, whether it's trying to stay home a little bit more or it's wearing a face mask. Those are all things that prevent spread to others. So that is a great way to individually own helping. Beyond that, there are lots of volunteer opportunities, actually. So let me tee up David Schnee to speak to our website and how to sync up with different ways to volunteer in a COVID-safe way. And there's also donation opportunities. The simplest way is just go to onealbuquerquefoundation.org. And right now we're prioritizing homeless vouchers pursuant to our previous call. We also are looking at ways we can use those funds to help small businesses through our micro business program. So anyway, that's always a good way to help. And David, if you'd like to share a little bit about the volunteer program, that'd be great.
Definitely. Thank you, Mayor Keller, and good evening, everyone. This is David Schnee. I'm the Civic Engagement Manager at the Mayor's Office. So volunteers will continue to play a critical role as the city reopens. And since March 17th, close to 1,200 volunteers have logged over 13,000 hours on the One ABQ Volunteers website. The page has really been growing and is still a primary place for community members to find safe volunteer opportunities and donation drives. Additionally, non-city entities can continue to post their own volunteer opportunities and donation drives on the site as well. So if you're a nonprofit, faith-based organization, or a local business looking for volunteers, I encourage you to continue to post opportunities on the site. Once you pull up the site, you'll see a large red banner that will lead you directly to some opportunities dedicated to COVID support and relief. Right now, we have some pressing needs I can share. So volunteers are still needed to assist with screening employees at the Albuquerque Emergency Operations Center through June. Mass Drive New Mexico 2020 is recruiting volunteers with sewing skills and seeking donations to make sure local health providers don't run out of protective masks. Mask making will continue to be a priority as the state mandates wearing masks, and is a great way to get connected with informal at-home volunteering. You can also sign up to support frontline health workers through Corona Care New Mexico. Corona Care connects frontline health workers with volunteers to help with child care, pet sitting, and household tasks and errands. So as I mentioned before, volunteers have logged over 13,000 hours on the city site. This equates to over $340,000 that may be reimbursed to the city through a FEMA public assistance grant, which will go a long way to helping our community recover. Volunteer hours are worth over $25 per hour. However, we know there are still volunteers and hours are out there that aren't being captured. So please contact One ABQ Volunteers if you or your organization need help capturing COVID-19 volunteer hours. I encourage you to find these opportunities and many more and record your hours at oneabqvolunteers.com. That's one spelled out, abqvolunteers.com. So thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Reminder, *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and our city officials a question, and we're going to try and get to as many tonight as possible. Next up, we're going to go to Stephen, and Stephen's got a question about city finances. Stephen, go right ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor. My question is in regards to possible furloughs for City of Albuquerque employees. I am a blue-collar employee, and we've been pretty fortunate to still be working and, keep our jobs and continue just doing what we do. But I know that furloughs are pretty possible, and I just want to know if you might even have a time frame of when that might take place.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that question, and thanks for all your work for the city too. We in Albuquerque are, we have lots of responsibility, city employees, to obviously help keep the safety net up for our city in every way, and also, really for a lot of New Mexico, as I mentioned earlier, who enjoys our city even if they don't live here. That responsibility, also does come with, I think, some positive aspects. And our city was fortunate enough, we fought hard for federal funding through this CARES Act that everyone has heard about. And our city was fortunate enough, we made the big city criteria to get some of that funding. And I'm mentioning this only because we would have already had to do furloughs if we did not get that funding. But the good news is we did get that funding. Now, we can only use it for certain things. So to answer your question, here's what we're doing. We know we're going to be able to use enough of this money to get us through the end of the fiscal year. And city employees, of course, are familiar with this, but basically to get us to July 1. So we don't anticipate furloughs of any kind for two reasons, because of that funding, and also because we cut about $10 million out of the budget by cutting some contracts and just cutting costs, cutting travel, cutting perks, things of this nature. So we cut $10 million and we're able to use the federal money for the rest. We're going to be okay till July. Now, after July, it's going to get a little bit more challenging. Right now, we are going through the process of putting together the budget for next year. So just on a preliminary basis, what I can share with you is that we feel good about the first 6 months or the calendar year, so getting us to December. And again, that's just based on what we think we can get reimbursed for from the federal government. And so we have a high level of confidence in that, but there are two challenges. Number one, after that, so if the economy hasn't recovered, this winter could be really tough for city employees and everyone in the workforce if we're all still dealing with the economic drag associated with Corona. Number two, we also know that if things do happen to get worse, like let's say we have an outbreak in Albuquerque in July, this would be very devastating to our revenues because remember, city revenues come from taxes based on sales transactions. So if there's no sales because everything's closed, we're not going to have any revenue. So that's a scenario where we would have to look, unfortunately, at things like furloughs sooner. But we hope those are unlikely. So I think the good news is we got a few months for sure. We feel good up until December, but wild card beyond there. And of course, if something happens over the summer, we could be really in a tough spot. So I hope that answers your question. And stay tuned. We are trying to update city employees when we have new information. And so, once we get the budget put together in the next 10 days or so, I think we'll also have a little bit more information.
Thank you, Mayor. Reminder, *3 to ask Mayor Keller a question. Next up, we're going to go to Leo. And Leo has a question about our schools here in Albuquerque. Leo, go right ahead. You're on the line with Mayor Keller.
Hi, yeah. I just have a question. Do you know if schools will be reopening in the fall or if they're going to start online?
Hi, Leo. Thanks for calling in. And boy, the school question, I got to tell you, I know for my family and my daughter also who's at APS, we all really want to know the answer to this question. So I want to be straightforward with you, though, and let you know that there is no answer right now. So there are a number of options that people are looking at all over the country. And some people are looking at alternative schedules, mixing in person and online. Other schools are thinking about, different activities, different days. There's a lot of different methods being proposed. So I think you're just going to have to wait for your question a little longer. I would think that somewhere in July, so let's say in the next 6 weeks, which actually isn't too far away, we'll probably get some guidance on that. And, just as a reminder, at the city level, we always try and have input and try and advocate for what's best for our city, but those decisions are made at the state level. So it's really going to be our governor probably who's going to make the call on what schooling is going to look like come August.
Thank you, Mayor. As a reminder, *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller a question. Our next question comes from Shandy. And Shandy has a question about small businesses and restaurants. Shandy, go right ahead.
Hi, Mayor. I was just wondering, I actually work at a small cafe, and I have 4 kids. I was laid off the first week when all the COVID stuff had went on, and right now I'm wondering, I'm still laid off. I'm on unemployment, which I haven't gotten none of it yet. So I've been laid off. I have not got one payment for my unemployment, nothing like that. But I'm wondering what's going to be going into effect for our small businesses, our small cafes, and our restaurants. How are we going to reopen when their capacity is smaller than a lot of the other restaurants? what precautions are you guys going to take regarding these small cafes that, you know, we have so many regular customers that it's not even, our customers are so faithful to our cafe, it's hard to not even be able to be there. On top of the fact that the new
Hey, Sandy, I think we just lost you there at the end, but I think I got the gist of some of your question there. And I know it's, very unfortunate that, for your situation, you were laid off. Let me speak to a couple aspects of that. Number one, I couldn't quite tell if you were able to at least sign up for benefits. If you are interested in that, I just would strongly encourage it, especially because they're extra high right now, right? They have an additional amount of money that's being added by the federal government. Also, as a reminder to folks, I think our Workforce Solutions Department at the state, which oversees this, is catching up. I know they're behind, but now it seems like they've almost caught up. So keep trying. It's just financially, it's so worth it. I was on welfare at one point myself, and it was extremely helpful for that period of my life. So just take advantage of those things. And secondly, to your point about small businesses, we are trying to help, especially those small cafes. We were able to scrounge up about $1 million, and we used it for micro businesses, and we gave out $5,000 grants just to keep these cafes, ready to reopen. And actually about a third of them went to things like cafes or restaurants. So we actually have been in pretty close touch with thousands of them all across the city. And one of the things we're trying to do is raise funding to continue to do that. So I'm going to open it up to a gentleman named David Sayers, who runs our small business office, to add in some other thoughts. But before he begins, I also just want to mention that I'm hoping that in the next phase, as at least as the state has indicated, that the next phase is going to be a limited capacity, either 25% or 50% for restaurants. And again, depending on timing, but I'm hoping that's less than 4 weeks away. So, I'm hoping if folks can just hang on a little longer, we're all going to be able to go to cafes again. It'll be different, but at least it'll be something. So, David, what else would you like to add into that from the Small Business Office?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mayor. So the mayor was correct. We did have a grant program that had been exhausted at this point until we raised some more capital. I have been receiving a lot of questions as far as how these business owners can supply or supplement their employees during this time. There was several efforts, and one of the bigger ones I know of was through the Restaurant Association. They were offering $500 grants to restaurant employees who have been furloughed or laid off, and that had quickly dried up, and I think they're still actively trying to work to raise more capital like the rest of these other programs. If you have any questions as far as the restaurant business and the restaurant industry, I always encourage folks to call the Small Business Office, especially the owners, and I can try to help direct them to the available resources that are out there. We do also list all resources for all small businesses that are available on federal, state, and local municipalities, and those are listed and updated daily at the Small Business Office website. But great question. I will be happy to take other questions as far as businesses and employees if you just give me a call or shoot us an email.
Thank you very much, David. As a reminder, *3 if you would like to ask Mayor Keller a question, and we're going to try and get to a couple more questions here before we go to Mayor Keller for some closing remarks. Next up, we have a question from Sylvia, and Sylvia has a question about law enforcement and public safety. Sylvia, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to see, I've asked the question before, but nobody called me back. I would assume we're having a lot less crime on the streets since everybody is sheltering, but I imagine we're having a lot more domestic violence. Can you speak to that?
Yes, Sylvia, thank you, and we can. What I'm going to do is tee up our Deputy Chief of Police, who's in charge of all our field operations, Chief Medina. But, I would just mention that at a high level, most aspects of crime are actually down, as you predicted. Some are up, like commercial break-ins are up because no one's working, right? So it's, some of these things are somewhat predictable, but nonetheless still real. But we were always very concerned about crime in the home, right? This is child abuse and domestic violence. And so, fortunately, we think in Albuquerque things have been relatively the same as they were before. However, we're very worried about underreporting because we're worried that whether it's a child or an adult, they're unable to report because they're essentially stuck at home with the perpetrator in the house with them. So we're very concerned about this. And so let me let our DC, Medina, talk about this further.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think you hit it right on the head. We are seeing some positive reductions in areas that we wanted to see reductions. Our year-to-date numbers for homicides are down. Our auto theft numbers are down for a third year in a row, year-to-date, double digits. So we're seeing a lot of success in crimes going down. But like the mayor said, we're really concerned about unreported domestic violence and unreported child abuse. And I think this goes back to where we need to ask the community for their help. And we need to remind the community of the old saying, if you see something, report it. So let's be good neighbors and let's keep an eye out for the welfare of our kids in our community and for the adults that are in domestic violence situations. And if you see or hear something, go ahead and make that phone call to the Albuquerque Police Department so we could get officers out there and get people the resources they need. Because this is a very trying time. Some people have been in their homes that I've spoken to for nearly 52, 53 days with just a supermarket run here and there. And they are trying times, and we have to help our community the best we can. And sometimes just getting those resources out there and getting that officer out there to interact with the family and calm things down is the best thing that we could do. So like I said earlier, if you see something, you hear something, please report it, because that's our concern, that there are some people that are in bad situations that are unable to report them.
Thank you very much, DC Medina. We're going to try and get to a couple more questions here. Next up, we have Natasha, and Natasha has a question about the summer lunch program. Natasha, you're live on the line. Go right ahead.
Hi, Mayor. How are you? I'm checking to see if you have any information or any plan for the free summer lunch programs that are usually held throughout the summer at, parks and apartment complexes and stuff where kids can go out, around lunchtime and get a free lunch. And that's all.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and it's one. It is another one of these kind of reflections of our city, in that it's not necessarily something that all cities do, but for a long time, Albuquerque has been a huge provider of meals, and a lot of folks, they're often in conjunction because they're at a school or near a community center. But interestingly, it's a partnership with APS. APS, I believe, makes the food, but we distribute it during the summer. And so we play a big role in this, as you've highlighted, and it's something a lot of people are concerned about. And just to put a number or a rough estimate, we're talking about tens of thousands of kids who get their meals in our program. So this is very important. And I think also we have the right person on the phone to illustrate a little bit about what we're looking at this summer. Carol Pierce, I think this is in your wheelhouse. Go ahead.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for that very important question. We are prepared as of June 1st that we will have 30 locations begin with grab-and-go meal sites. And what we anticipate as we open up more with Phase 2 and Phase 3, that more sites will be added. So we're preparing flyers to put those around town and the locations where people can get those meals, grab those meals. And the sites will also be published at cabq.gov/summer. And we know those are very important, and we appreciate the partnership with APS to provide those meals through their kitchens. And if we could also go back to the previous question on child abuse, so appreciate that question. As we prepare to open up with youth programming in all of our community centers, we also prepare our staff to look for those signs and to just be really aware, working with young people when those families are under stress, and look for the signs and symptoms of potential abuse. So we're looking at that from a prevention standpoint also with our staff through that youth programming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Pierce. We are going to take one more question, and our question comes from Lisa. And Lisa has a question about entertainment, about concerts, but also some specific questions for our Metal Mayor. Go right ahead, Lisa.
Hello, Metal Mayor. I just had a question when concerts will start up again. If you yourself bought any tickets to any metal shows, and if so, who? And who have you been listening to during this time to get you through? Because as a fellow metalhead, I know how important the music is.
Oh, Lisa, I love your question. No bias there, but definitely my favorite question over the last few days. But anyway, I think what I'd love to do, let me speak to that, and then also tee up just for all music fans. I know our cultural services is working on something to kind of help us tide by for now. So, but before I get to that, so I was really excited about the Testament concert, and of course that was canceled. So I did have tickets for that, and that was just really unfortunate, but I understand why it was, and I hope to see them. Hopefully they'll come back soon. So next up, Trivium's coming back, so I hope that will pan out, and we'll be able to go to that show. To get by, I've been listening to a lot of Cathedral. You can check that out, a little old school. And also a band named DAD, which actually is from Denmark. Not quite metal, but hard rock, and pretty cool. So lots more I could share on that, but I do want to let folks know, for the unfortunate few who don't like heavy metal, we have some other options for you. So, Shell, do you want to go over what the city's doing for live music?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that wonderful question on music. I agree. It's very hard for us to be without our live music and live theater and all of these things and festivals, which make just make our summers so amazing. We have so much live music in Albuquerque across the summer and outside, and unfortunately at this point, just because of the cap on the number of people that we can have in a space, we don't have any live music and concerts planned, and we're all just kind of waiting to see how things unfold and how our community does, to see when we can bring those back to the community. One of the things that I'm really proud of is we've put some money into the creative economy through our do-it-yourself media, and we've contracted with some local bands who have really produced some wonderful concerts from their backyards and their driveways. And we put those on our public access channels, and you can also see them at the City of Albuquerque's YouTube channel through our One Albuquerque Media. So just a couple weeks ago, we had watch parties for Severo y su grupo, and last week we had La Ren did a really wonderful concert that we all did watch parties for. So we're trying to support and encourage our bands and put some resources into them continuing to make music for everyone. We're just going to have to do it in really unconventional ways, and we have a few other ideas that as things loosen up, we're going to be able to bring to the community, hopefully in July, but depends on if we all continue to do our part and keep our community healthy moving forward. So thank you so much for that question. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director. And thank you again to everyone for joining. We're going to hand it back off to Mayor Keller for some brief closing remarks.
Well, thanks again to everyone who participated this evening, and we're going to continue to work to protect everyone in our city as best that we can with respect, especially, of course, to public health, but also public safety. But we also want to try and make sure folks have the goods and services that they need, and whether it's the ability for working families to go back to work and for childcare, or it's for small businesses to get through this time and stay open. So we remain dedicated, we remain resilient, and I know our city is going to be able to get through this. And if you didn't get a chance to ask a question today, I do want to let you know that you can call 311. They are up and running and then some, very busy, but easy to get through there. You can also call our constituent services office. That's really just the folks right outside the door here up in City Hall at 768-3000. You can also visit cabq.gov. There's a lot of information on our website, and you'll see right at the top there's sort of everything corona-related. So I want to thank all of you for continuing to stay home as best you can, to follow these guidelines in terms of washing hands and face masks and all of these things, and social distancing that truly have done a great job of slowing the spread of coronavirus in the metro area. I at least am proud of our city. We have done a good job through this, and I think coming out of this, we're going to be one of the shining stars nationally, both the state of New Mexico in many ways and Albuquerque. We have very good health ratings so far compared to others, and not that it's a contest, but it makes me grateful to live here and grateful to each of you. So with that, good night, and we'll look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to all of our City of Albuquerque officials who've joined us today to provide all of this key information. And thank you again to all of you for participating in today's telephone town hall. As the Mayor mentioned, you can visit www.cabq.gov for the latest information or call 311. If you'd like to leave a message for the Mayor or we didn't get to your question, please remain on the line and you can leave a voicemail in just a moment. This concludes the telephone town hall. Thank you.